Hello and welcome everyone to episode 32 of the Ball Talk podcast. My name is Ryan Bailey. This week's guest for the podcast is Gareth Fox. Gareth is a hypnotherapist who specialises in sport. I could go on and explain what exactly we're going to be talking about, but I think the podcast itself will do the talking for this one. I hope you enjoy it. And a big shout out to our sponsor, of course, as always, Adapt Athletic Performance and Therapy. Head over to Instagram and give them a follow at adapt_clinic. If you're watching this on YouTube, the handle is on your screen right now. So, without further ado, let's get straight into the podcast, and I do hope you enjoy episode 32. But Gareth, I could try and introduce you, but I'll let you introduce yourself. The floor is yours for the next minute or so.
Introduce myself. Well, I am, first and foremost, I'm an RTT therapist. RTT is it's a school of therapy which uses hypnotherapy as its main technique in a mode of work. But I specialize in sports therapy, sports hypnotherapy, and peak performance. And I'm also a sports journalist, so I've got a column for Gaelic Life that runs out of, I think Gaelic Life runs, it's in Tyrone anyway, I think it's in Oma, I think it runs out of, but anyway, I'm a columnist for Gaelic Life. I write about everything mental to do with the game, all elements of performance and mental performance.
And you give, so in the journalism side of things, because I'm studying journalism myself, so you're given I suppose, a different outlook as well. You're going into your column isn't just saying, like the Joe Brawley column or the Paul Galvin column that is just analysing the weekend. Yours is from a different perspective of a game. Yeah. You have a different outlook.
So basically, well, I'm not a journalist. That's one of the main things. I'm a writer. I'm not a journalist, but I got in contact with, in fact, first of all, I was writing pieces for mental health for local newspapers around where I live, around the Portadown, Dungannon, Armagh, Tyrone area. And then it just so happened that I was given a column in Gaelic Life. So I'm not a journalist, but I don't concentrate specifically on weekly events. I concentrate on ways in which to interpret the game mentally. For example, you were talking about Joe Brawley. Joe Brawley also has a column for the same newspaper. And like, I would read Joe's columns, and if I disagree or with what he's saying, then that'll be the topic of my next column. It won't be about that week's sport. It'll be about, okay, what has Joe Brawley said that's wrong? Like, there's one that came up very recently where he slated absolutely everything to do with alternative medicine and alternative thinking, which is completely unfair. And so that I wrote an article in reply to that. I also do articles about all elements of the game. For example, one that came out today is about how to deal with defeat. One that came out in the previous week is what I call the man in the stand. So it's that voice in the stand that you can just hear over everyone vocally criticizing someone on his own team. So I wrote about that and the effect that has, because that's a big part of my work, is how words and vocabulary has a huge effect on your performance, because it has a huge effect on you chemically inside your body. When you consume negative criticism, it has a negative chemical release in your body, as much as if you consume positive criticism, it has a positive chemical release. So this is what I'm doing. I'm talking about GAA, performance in the GAA, but it's not topical as in this happened in the GAA this week, I'm going to write an article about it. Okay. I don't pick and choose my articles. I do sometimes, whatever the feedback is from clients, things like that. Okay, so recently we've had the championships. We've had a lot of people, 95% of all GAA players have suffered from defeat. I've had a lot of people come in saying, look, we've just been defeated. I feel horrible. I feel whatever. What can I do about it? And then that will be the topic of my next column.
Okay. So I do want to go into the side of working with clients and that, but you touched on Joe Brawley there, and I know there will be people that are either watching this podcast or listening to it that will say sports hypnotherapy, that's a load of you know what, and I'm sure you've got that yourself. And just to touch on what Joe Brawley said, and I'll let you explain the benefits of it, I suppose, you know, your general response to people that call it what Joe Brawley called any sports of sports psychology, he called the bullshit industry. is what Joe put it as. I think it was a year or two ago. So your response to that, because a lot of people I know will think that they won't give psychology or hypnotherapy a chance. So what would your
Right.
response to that be?
So that was his original go at Enda McNulty, I think it was. Wasn't he having a go at Enda McNulty, who was then taken on board with Leinster and then Ireland, and he was having a go at, perhaps that's the beginning of it, I can't remember, but
Yeah, there were a few psychologists in it,
there
yeah.
were a few. There was one, he wrote an article for Gaelic Life in July about, first and foremost, the idea of an article, and I'll get to what you've asked very quickly, but his article originally in Gaelic Life that I took, that I disagreed with, was he was having a go at people who claimed that they could cure COVID. Basically, and he called them bullshit artists. And he did every right to call someone who can claim to cure something that we have no idea about as a bullshit artist. But then he then linked up everything to do with alternative medicine, sports psychology, because he was talking about a story of an ex, maybe it was Henry Downey, who had an injury, and then someone said, you need to go to see this person, and this person can give you the cure for whatever it is. So it was like, it was to do with belief. And what Brawley then said was that anything that's to do with belief is bullshit. Anything that requires you to believe in the process is bullshit. And he's completely wrong, because belief is a physical thing. Like people don't understand that belief actually is a physical thing. I'll give you an example, and this is the example I wrote in my reply article to his. You have two people. You have one person who has a phobia of flying, and the other person who doesn't have a phobia of flying. And you make them take a plane journey every day for 6 months. After the 6 months, the person who has a phobia of flying will be, you can measure that they will be physically more ill than the other person beside them. They will have aged more. They will have more damaged cells. They'll show all the signs of aging and stress, simply because of what they believe is going to happen to them when they get into a plane. That's all it is. There's nothing physical happening to that person. It's a belief about their environment, which is causing a physical reaction in your body.
Okay.
So that's why belief is a real, measurable, quantifiable thing that you actually have to take seriously, because the difference between those two people is simply one believes that they're going to die on a plane, and so they're stressed about it, and the other one doesn't. And because they're stressed about it, they're releasing stress chemical, which is cortisol or adrenaline in your body, and that's having a stress reaction in your body, which causes aging, which causes heart disease, which causes cancer, which causes so many autoimmune diseases. And this is all down to what they believe. So Brawley, in writing off sports psychology, in writing off sports hypnotherapy, because he doesn't believe that belief is an actual thing that has a valid effect, well, that's where he's wrong, because in that simple example, we see that belief really does have a physical effect on the body.
Okay. So I watched, because I didn't want to come into this podcast completely blind, because I know, like, I kind of had a bit of an idea on the whole sports hypnotherapy thing, but very slight. And just the example you used there with the people flying, I saw Joe Rogan had Mike Tyson on talking about it, and there was another American reporter interviewed, is Eddie Hall. He's the world's strongest man competitor over in England. You know, the guy I'm on about. Have you seen the interview?
Yeah. No, I've seen Joe Rogan, Mike Tyson, but I haven't seen the Eddie Hall one. But there has actually been a sports hypnotherapist on Joe Rogan, who is an English guy who's a hypnotherapist for kickboxers.
That's right. Yeah, he was on with the kickboxer, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw a few videos like that, but I imagine there's different ways, judging from them two interviews, there's different ways of sports hypnotherapy working with different people as well. The same as it would sports psychology.
Yeah. So basically, you call it sports hypnotherapy. Let's call it that, because the clients are athletes, but it's just hypnotherapy. That's all it is. It just so happens that you're working with people who are involved in sport. I do the same thing. I'm a general hypnotherapist. Like tomorrow and next week, I'm going to be working with general public on things like anxiety, on depression, on relationship issues, on success issues, phobias, things like that. I use the same techniques. It just so happens that my clients or in the sporting world, and that's why I call it sports hypnotherapy. All it is a technique. It's only a technique which, what is the word? Which basically uses science as its base in order to get improvement, because hypnotherapy is just a technique to go directly into the subconscious mind, which is where we store all the things that we believe and all the programs that we have in order to help us survive. So hypnotherapy, like, doesn't matter the technique that the person is using, they're going to the same place. They're going to the place where you keep all the programs, and they're changing the programs in that place. So multiple hypnotherapists might have multiple techniques. I went to a specific hypnotherapy school that taught me a specific technique. I imagine the guy who was on Joe Rogan, he's got his own technique.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's the same thing. It's going to the subconscious mind and changing subconscious programs. The Mike Tyson one, I always find fascinating, because Mike Tyson, I like to use Mike Tyson kind of as my example for athletes, because people think when they hear Mike Tyson was hypnotized, that Mike Tyson was hypnotized to think that he was a killer. He was more so hypnotized to be really comfortable in his environment.
Yes.
That's more or less what he was hypnotized to be, because if you see the majority of Mike Tyson's knockouts, it's the same thing. It's the same movement, and it finishes in the same, the same strike. It's the dodge, the weave, the peekaboo, the Mike Tyson, and then that punch. And basically what that means is that he was hypnotized to feel comfortable in the ring against this opponent. So therefore he can put into practice what he's been training, because he's got no stress, he's got no cortisol in his body, because he's familiar with his environment. And therefore that allows him just to execute what he's learned. So all he's doing is executing what he's learned in training, but the hypnotherapy helped him to feel comfortable in his environment.
When you work with, and I know I'm bouncing around different topics here, Gareth, but when you're working in the hypnotherapy in terms of sports, would you prefer to work with people one-to-one, or would you prefer to work with teams? Because I'm sure one-to-one, you find out what exactly it is that gets
Yes.
to as you said, different people work in different ways. You'll get to that part where the belief in the person's head.
It is a one-to-one thing. The best results, well, no, I'm going to say the best results. It's not specifically. I have done group hypnotherapy, but if I was to do a session with you today, it would be, I would relax you. So what we call put into a state of hypnosis, but it's just about being relaxed. And then if you'd come to me with a certain issue, I would go back to your individual moments in your past where this issue came about. So let's say, for example, multiple clients that I have with regards Gaelic can't shoot, get into shooting range, but can't shoot, can't pull the trigger without even thinking about shooting. They're fisting it off, and they want to know, well, why am I doing that? Why am I not even thinking about shooting? Why is that just? So I would go to that specific person and say, okay, we're going to go right back to a moment that you downloaded the belief that you can't shoot. So to work that out of the player system, that needs to be done individually.
Okay.
You can't do a group one and have that same effect. Whereas when I do a group one, I get a global, okay, you're going to go back to that issue that's all to do with why you're struggling or why you have performance anxiety, but I won't have that one-on-one direct conversation of, okay, so what is it that you're seeing? Okay, what are you starting to believe about yourself right now? Like, there's an exchange when you do one-on-one. It's therapy. It's a therapy session.
Yeah.
There's an exchange of, okay, what is it that's happening in this scene? What's going on? What are you starting to believe? I'm starting to believe that anytime I shoot, I'm going to get substituted, or someone's going to shout at me and I'm feeling embarrassed. But if I do it in a group, well, we don't have that individual exchange. It's like you've got your scenes that have given you the issue that you have, but you're not vocalizing them because there's other players around. Now, I have worked in teams before, and I do like a group hypnotherapy session, but the individual, they have their scenes, but they just keep them to themselves.
Yeah. And the same with, it's similar with every group, sort of, speaking out in a group, whether it's 5-year-olds in a classroom, it's the same sort of ways about it.
Yeah.
In terms of, so you said about, use the example there of someone being afraid to shoot. Did that come to your mind? Is that the one that you'd find in Gaelic footballers being the biggest problem that they come to you with, or what would be the biggest problem they come to you with?
The biggest problem, so I call them negative beliefs or limiting beliefs, because everything that you do in life is execution of a belief that you have about yourself and about your environment. Like the way you're talking to me today is because of your belief about yourself, your belief about me. You know what I mean? It's a
Yeah.
materialization of your belief. So when someone is struggling with something, it's because they have a limiting or a negative belief. And that's what's given the sort of negative sort of life. So the biggest limiting belief that I find with athletes is that they believe they're going to get injured.
Okay.
Athletes who, like, I do get performance anxiety, believe they're going to have a bad game, can't shoot, can't do certain things. But the big one is going out onto the field knowing you're going to get injured. That's a belief. That isn't a physical thing. That's a belief. I'm going to get injured. Oh, when I go out, I know I'm going to do my knee again. I'm going to pull my hamstring again. That's a belief. And that's a huge one that I have.
I'll just stop you there just before you go on. Is that most commonly, so that's probably the most common one that you come across, players afraid of getting injured. Is that in players that are probably coming back from injury, maybe their first game back?
Yes, a lot of the times it's that. So I would work alongside physios. Physios would send me clients saying, look, we've just done this operation. They've done, let's say, this many months rehab. They're starting to pick up the training again. I want you to work with them. I want you to go in and get the mind ready and take out the belief that they're going to get injured. But there will also be players who've had injuries in the past, which has then affected performance. And when they've got a big game coming up, this could be a year or two later after a big injury. It could be, I'm getting injured today. I just feel it. I know it. And the thing is, when you have a belief that you're going to get injured, that's a stressful belief. So what that does is that anything that you create an image or have self-talk that creates stress in your mind, then creates stress in your body. So your mind goes, oh, there's stress. Okay, so then it switches on what's known as the fight or flight. Fight or flight is either there's something dangerous in your environment, either you run away from it, flight, or you stand and fight it, fight. So in order to be able to do that, your body immediately floods all your system with cortisol, with adrenaline, and it flushes like your muscles full of blood to be able to fight or to be able to run away. But what this then does on the long term is it tightens your muscles. Too much cortisol in your body tightens your muscles. It takes the blood away from your extremities, so you have less of a feel for the ball when you catch it for around your feet. When you're running, it speeds up your heart rate, so you get like you get fatigued faster. And it creates the perfect environment for injury, because you've weakened your immune system. If all your focus is on escaping the danger that you see in front of you, then none of your focus is on repair, cell growth, your immune system. So that's how most people get injured. If you look at a great example very recently was a statistic that I read about Eden Hazard, and then I went on to read it about Dembele from Barcelona. Hazard in 7 years missed 15 games for Chelsea because he was comfortable. He signs for Real Madrid. He's the 5th most expensive player in the world. There's a huge tag on his head, huge stress. And in 1 year, he's missed 29 games and he's injured a game because he's got cortisol flushing through his body every time he steps out on the field for Madrid, because he's frightened. He's frightened about what it means now. There's a different mental image. He's saying different things to himself. So he's creating more stress. Dembele. I was always surprised at Dembele, because Dembele looks like a kind of like I don't want to say a weak character, but he does look like he has a weak character. You know, he's not a hard man. And therefore he was the second most expensive player in the world. Mm-hmm. And because he looks like, and this could be wrong, but he looks like he's that weak character. And he did the unveiling for Barcelona, and he couldn't keep the ball up. He couldn't do any tricks. He kept fumbling because he was stressed. And he's carried that into his Barcelona career since 2017. In 3 years, he's missed over 80 games with 9 separate injuries, because every time he steps out, he's under the pressure of that price tag. I have to live up to this price tag. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. Those are stressful images, which create stress in your body, which creates injury. Look at all his injuries are muscle injuries, because his muscles are tight because of the cortisol in his body. And then that doesn't flush out. He doesn't get rid of it. So then he starts to run and there's a muscle tear. And that's how it happens. So players who go out thinking they're going to get injured, get injured.
Okay. So just to link to that, there's like everybody knows, there's probably one, unfortunately, in every club. There's a lad that you're like, geez, the poor lad is always injured. He's done the cruciate twice. He's done his shoulder. He has a plate in his, his collarbone done or something. Do you think that could be that concession of injuries could be down to the belief that,
yes,
as you said, the muscles tighten up the cortisol in the body?
Yeah, look, I work a lot with ACL injuries as a supplementary kind of healing, because I work around using the mind to heal the body, as well as obviously the physio coming in, and as well as an operation. But it speeds up, it seems to speed up the sort of healing process. And if you asked anyone, majority of my clients, when I said, look, what was going on around the time of the injury? And a lot of them would say stuff like, look, I got it in a certain match where I felt like all the pressure was on me. Like I had way too much pressure on me. There was something happening in their environment. There was something riding on the game. Just there was so much pressure that the mental self-talk was, I can't deal with this. There's too much pressure. I can't deal with this. And because your thoughts are physical things, they create physical chemical reactions. A physical reaction to you saying there's too much pressure is something blowing out, is something giving way. And that's your knee. And that's why you have so many ACL injuries from players who feel under pressure, who don't feel supported. Like I know a client of mine got embarrassed from a substitution in a inter-county under-21 game that was televised a few years ago. And the following week he had his club game and he did his ACL, because he had still in his body, he had that stress of, I'm not supported, no one supported me, this is embarrassing, I'm under way too much pressure. And then the knee just give out. Just simply, like, the way your mind works is that whatever image you create in your mind, or whatever words that you say to yourself, that makes a blueprint for your mind to actually make real. That's what it does. It makes real what you say to it. If you go out today and say, a dog's going to bite me, a dog's going to bite me, more than likely you're going to get bit by a dog when you pass it, because you're creating that sort of environment for the thing to happen. Or you're walking down a road, let's call it a dodgy enough road, and I'm going to get mugged, and someone walks past you and you give that impression of this thing's going to happen. Your mind tries to make these things real. Whatever you're saying to yourself, it creates a blueprint that your mind has to go and do. That's its job. It creates the images that you make. I do an example with my clients when they first come to me, just to show them the power of their own thoughts, is I get them to close their eyes and I get them to imagine that they're eating a lemon, and to really visualize eating that lemon and really smell the lemon, and really, like, visualize biting down it and the juices going to all corners of their mouth. And what the clients normally find is that they create an awful lot more saliva. Now, there is no lemon, but your mind doesn't know the difference between what's real and what isn't real. It just accepts the images that you create. So if you've created images that you're eating a lemon, your mind will just go, oh, we're eating a lemon. We need to create more saliva in order to be able to digest the lemon. And that's what it does.
Yeah, it's like when you're hungry. That's sort of way. You start thinking about food, your mind makes you feel hungry. That's all right. Yeah.
Yeah. You see, and this is something that's really not specifically to do with sports hypnotherapy, just to do with therapy itself, is that hunger and thirst are two survival mechanisms to tell your body, we need to eat to stay alive. And a lot of people don't realize that there's a third one, Actually, there are multiple, but the third one's really important too, which isn't a physical thing, it's an emotional one. Loneliness is a survival mechanism. It's your body's way to say, oh, we're out on our own. We need to get back into the group. Because we live in a new environment in a very old body. Our bodies are still the same bodies of hunter-gatherer times when we lived in a tribe. And the worst thing for anyone living in a tribe was not to be in that tribe, because they would find more difficult getting food, find it more difficult dealing with sickness, and also find more difficult dealing with a big saber-toothed tiger coming along and eating you.
Yeah.
So this is actually, loneliness is the same thing as hunger and thirst. It's just on an emotional level. It's your body realizing that there are no people in your environment, and it makes you want to be around people again because it wants you to get back to the group.
Just back to the sporting scenarios there as well, Gareth. You spoke about the catch of the next ball and things like that, and all your muscles tightening up, and you're telling yourself, as you said, you use the example of walking down the road and getting bit by the dog, or the dangerous road and things like that. I'd imagine that quite a number of free takers come to you as well, would they?
Yeah. It's like Johnny Wilkinson very recently said it in a podcast for the High Performance Podcast, which is, when you're playing the game, it's about everything, and it's about everything is all encompassed, and you're just part basically of a team, and you're just a fluid piece in the team. But as soon as referee blows that whistle for a free, it's all about you. And this is quite, you find this a lot with free takers, is that suddenly they're in a zone where there are things at stake. And the idea of the difficulty that free takers have is that if they miss, they've attached to missing a free, they've attached this feeling of rejection. And rejection is one of the most powerful feelings that you can have. And it's the same thing about being part of a tribe. This is innate in our bodies. Our body, rejection for our body is the worst thing, because it means being separate from the tribe, which means life or death. So our body doesn't know what a free kick is, because it also doesn't know what a game of football is. It just knows life or death. So when someone steps up to take a free, and there's that little bit of stress because they have associated rejection with this thing, if they miss, then they kick into like, oh, no, we can't do this. We're not allowed to do this thing because this thing causes rejection, and rejection kills us. The land comes and it eats us. So that's why you have, it's more people, I think, miss 10-yard, 15-yard frees than they do 45, because there's more rejection, there's more embarrassment based around this smaller distance than there is from this bigger one, because the rejection level is less from hitting a 45. I think we call it now a 50, don't we? Is it a 50 meter? We don't call it a 45 anymore.
Depends who lines the pitch.
Yeah, because I've been away from Ireland for a really long time. Actually, this is my first, I moved back here last month. I've been living I moved to England in 2006 to go to university, and then 2009 I moved to France. Now I still kept up with watching Gaelic, especially I follow all Armagh matches, all the Armagh championship matches, but like, I know now that we don't say a 45 anymore. We say a 50-yard ball, or 50, whatever it is, but I'm just so used to my 45s. But that's what it is. It's like, it's almost easier to miss the easy one than it is the harder one, because the idea of embarrassment and rejection is even bigger for that smaller one. So what I tend to do with my clients who come to me for that is to, first of all, to get them to visualize it, because once they visualize that type of situation, then it's not unfamiliar to them anymore. You have to, your body wants to always be in a state of what is familiar and never in a state of what's unfamiliar, because what's unfamiliar is dangerous. So if you can get a player to visualize over and over and over again taking that free kick, well, then that becomes familiar to them. So that's fine to be able to work on that, but also to take away the idea of rejection and failure, and get them used to the idea of, it's not that it's okay to miss, but that it just doesn't carry so much weight with it.
There's a lot, you've made some very interesting points, Gareth, and I have to say that it's like, I know it's from, I found there's a lot to take in there as well. I know I'm going to have to watch this back to kind of properly grasp what you've been saying as well. And it's we've only been going for about half an hour, and it's changed my outlook on hypnotherapy. Sorry, not just in sports, but in general. I'm gonna ask you, would you come back for a part 2 in a few weeks?
I would, surely, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Look,
because I think
I always go ahead.
Because I think if whoever is watching this podcast or listening to it, whether it be Spotify or YouTube or whatever other streaming platform, they might have some scenarios or questions that they have for you as well, that they might, after watching this, they might trigger something like, oh,
Yeah, definitely.
No, I'm not advertising free therapy, but I'm just
Look,
just something to throw at you, like.
If anyone wants, put together a Q&A, a list of questions, and you can pass on the list of questions, and in the next one we just bang them out. We'll answer them. Any scenarios, we'll answer them. Any way to help someone perform, because the biggest part of my journalism actually is to allow people to understand that it's okay to perform badly.
Yeah.
Like my article recently about defeat is, it's okay to lose. Now that doesn't mean roll over and lose. It means take the pressure and the fear of losing, which will then free you up to go and win. Because if you fear doing something, then, like I said, that cortisol is released in your body, which would limit what you can actually do. That's why a lot of players play within themselves. The best players play outside themselves. That's why we always say, oh, look, he's always very good at finding space. It's because he's not limited in himself. He's free, he's relaxed. That's why McGregor does his shaky arms, to show that he's relaxed. And that's what we want. We don't want any fear of the environment. We want to be relaxed in the environment we're in, and that allows us to execute what we've been practicing.
So that wraps up episode number 32 of the podcast. My thanks to Gareth Fox for coming along and joining me. As you might have heard there at the end, we will have a part 2 in the coming weeks. So the plan is that if anybody has any questions or any scenarios that they'd like to send on for myself and mainly for Gareth to discuss and to explain and talk through, please do send them on, and I look forward to your suggestions. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. I enjoyed it myself. It's given me a different outlook on hypnotherapy and hypnosis and the different techniques that come with it. Just a reminder to give a shout out to our sponsor, Adapt Athletic Performance and Therapy. Please go over to Instagram, give them a follow if you can. And that's it now for next week. Join me next week for the next podcast. Until then, goodbye.